everybody's had enough time to get logged on. So I'll go ahead and just make some introductions first. I'm Johnny Gailey. I'm managing the South Fork Kings GSA. And we have with us on the Zoom here is Amir Hussein, who is with Geosyntec. He is our engineering consultant. And Alex Romero is also with Geosyntec. He's the one that actually does all of Amir's work. And then we've got Julie Martella, who is helping us with our outreach on the allocations and for the GSP. And we've invited Dusty Ferentz with the Farm Bureau to give us an update on the Farm Bureau's activities. So we don't have a lot of people online. I don't know how many more are going to join us as we go, but if you do have questions, just raise your hand and then we'll call your name. You can unmute yourself. Otherwise, just try to stay muted so that we don't talk over each other. We are recording the meeting. We do plan on posting this as an informational video on the website. So just want to give you all a heads up on that. So I'm going to go ahead and start. So this is our South Fork Kings GSA draft allocation policy workshop. And the policy's been put out for a 45-day public comment period. So we thought we would have a couple of workshops to explain what we're planning on doing. But I actually want to start with just a Sigma background. So I'm going to go ahead and give a quick Sigma 101. Most of the people on the call here have heard all of this before and know it, but I'm going to go through this anyways for the benefit of the people that might view the recording. So South Fork Kings GSA, we are one of 5 GSAs in the Tulare Lake Subbasin. You can see on the maps here, we're in the northwestern corner of the Tulare Lake Subbasin. We go from the South Fork of the Kings River down to Nevada Avenue, just south of Stratford. And then our western border is with Westlands Water District, and our eastern border is with the Kings County Water District. This is a subsidence map. This is really the real reason why we really have to kick things into high gear at South Fork, and all of us actually in the Tulare Lake Subbasin. The state is really hot on our heels for the subsidence. The reds here are 7 feet since 2015. The state is really viewing that as problematic. And so part of the reason that we're actually talking about implementing these allocation policies is to help reduce or minimize the impacts of subsidence in the subbasin. So SGMA, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, was passed in 2014. It was implemented first in the critically overdrafted basins, so the entire South San Joaquin Valley, essentially. The groundwater sustainability agencies in those critically overdrafted basins were required to be formed by 2017. And the first groundwater sustainability plans had to be submitted and implemented starting in 2020. So SGMA defines undesirable results, and they're defined as significant and unreasonable effects caused by groundwater allocations. So the 6 undesirable results defined in the law are chronic lowering of groundwater levels, reduction of groundwater storage, seawater intrusion. Now, this is one that we do not have here in the San Joaquin Valley, but there are basins along the coast that do have to deal with that. Degraded water quality, land subsidence, and depletions of interconnected surface water. There are a lot of other agencies other than the South Fork Kings GSA that deal with water quality, but the state is using this as a way to basically force the GSAs to kind of be a catch-all for any change in water quality from this point forward. So that's and especially now that we're the state water, under the jurisdiction of the State Water Board, that's their specialty, is water quality. So in the GSP, we have certain things that need to be in there. We have a basin setting report. That work has already been done for the first GSPs that were submitted in 2020. That is basically a historical and geological report that hasn't changed. So that part of our groundwater plan doesn't need to be really updated or modified. And then we have to set sustainable management criteria, and from those sustainable management criteria, there are minimum thresholds for each of those undesirable results that are set. So minimum thresholds and measurable objectives. And those are things like, in our case, for subsidence, we're saying that we're going to allow a maximum of 7 feet of subsidence since 2020 in South Fork Kings. And that's in our draft subsidence management plan. The other things we have minimum thresholds for would be for water levels. We have 3 distinct aquifers. So we have a minimum thresholds that we will be setting for the A zone, which is the upper aquifer down to about 100 feet. And then the B zone, which is from 100 feet down to the top of the Corcoran clay, anywhere from 550 to 650 feet in our area generally. And we'll have a third aquifer below the clay. And each one of those aquifers will have a separate minimum threshold for water levels. There's a chapter on project and management actions. So you've heard a lot of talk about groundwater recharge projects and different things to try to increase the water supply. We basically have 2 things we can do. We can increase water supply, or we can reduce usage. And basically it's going to be a combination of both of those things to create a sustainable groundwater basin. So the GSP has to lay out what our action plans are and how we're planning on implementing that plan. So all of those things are chapters in the GSP. They end up being very lengthy documents. It's over 1,000 pages with all of the addendums that are attached. So Sigma implementation, there is an outreach plan that we're actually currently updating, because our original outreach plan that we submitted in 2020 was after rereading it, it was very old, out of date. So that's getting updated. We're updating our water level and water quality monitoring networks. We need to have a really, representative record keeping of what those levels are and what the water quality are going forward, so that we actually have a baseline that we can refer back to, and we can see, if it's getting better or worse, what direction we're going with those things. Sigma is going to require us to do well and water quality mitigation. So if we dry up domestic wells and we allow that to happen in our subbasin, the state's going to hold us responsible as a GSA for mitigating the effects of those dry wells. So that can be anything from replacement water delivery to up to drilling a new well, or even facilitating a connection to a city if there's a city water supply that's nearby. We're also have a subsidence monitoring network. So we're going to be actually adding some benchmarks to our subsidence monitoring network and increasing that based on what we've got defined as critical infrastructure in the GSP. And our projects and management actions. And so, like I said, the GSA at this point is not doing any projects on its own. We did a pilot water injection that we did. So that project was funded through a grant. Management actions are basically what we're talking about tonight. The management actions are things like groundwater allocations. So there's been several studies since this law was passed in 2014 to talk about the impacts of Sigma. There's the Public Policy Institute for California has done a study that reported somewhere between 500,000 and 900,000 acre reduction in cropland in the San Joaquin Valley. UC Merced has just released a study talking about the increased air pollution from fallow fields that would happen as a result of implementation of Sigma. UC Berkeley's Dr. Sunding had done a report that talked about the loss of revenue, 1.1 billion in lost employee income from the implementation of Sigma. And of course, all of these studies have shown that there's going to be increased poverty in the population centers that are focused on agriculture, which is essentially all of our cities in the San Joaquin Valley. So the impacts of implementing Sigma are huge because historically we are overdrafted. We have been using more groundwater than has been being replaced, and that needs to come into balance. But without an increase in surface water supply, these results are pretty much guaranteed to happen in the valley. I'm going to pass this on to Dusty now that we've kind of done our Sigma 101, and the Farm Bureau has done some things to help slow enforcement of Sigma down for us to give us some time to actually do a good job coming up with these policies. And I'm going to let Dusty talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, thanks, Johnny. Thanks for allowing me to talk to this group tonight. We, for those of you who don't know, the Farm Bureau, after the Tulare Lake Subbasin was placed on probation by the State Water Resources Control Board in 2024, sued the state board over that designation. And that's really working to do a couple of things. Yes, it has bought some time for the subbasin to continue working on these plans and get them updated and submitted, hopefully in a way that satisfies DWR without bankrupting the subbasin. In addition to that, however, the lawsuit really is leveling the playing field for all subbasins in California. DWR and the state board have historically uh, moved the goalpost on us, if you will, throughout Sigma, and they're, as a regulatory agency, they're required by law to review and implement laws evenly across the state. And it's been our perspective, and so far the court's perspective, that the two agencies have not done that, and that was highlighted in their decision to place the subbasin on probation. So that's really what we're fighting for here as we continue this effort. Um, I imagine most of you have heard, if you know of our lawsuit, that we we were before the appellate court in October. The appellate court offered a ruling, in actually two rulings in favor of the State Water Board at the end of October. And as unfortunate as those two rulings were, our lawsuit is a long way from over. There were about half of our case was before the appellate court, and the appellate court was considering whether or not these causes of action should remain part of the case in front of the trial court when we get back to Kings County Superior Court. Unfortunately, the appellate court said no, agreeing with the State Water Board that those causes of action should not remain in the case. However, Farm Bureau has decided recently that we are going to seek California Supreme Court review of the appellate court's ruling. We don't know that the Supreme Court will hear it, and we of course don't know how they will rule, but we are going to request that they review that decision, and that should highlight to everybody how important we see this lawsuit from a statewide perspective. The California Supreme Court is responsible for looking at cases in the court system of statewide importance and statewide significance. And we're arguing that Sigma is exactly that case. So that's one thing that we've got going on, trying to keep this lawsuit as strong as possible. However, despite what happens with the Supreme Court, we still have causes of action that go before the trial court in Kings County. That judge has told us that we are likely to win or will win on those causes of action, and we have to anticipate the State Water Board appealing those as well. But it should highlight to everybody how strong this case is and how important this case is. It's a long way from over. The appellate court decision was unfavorable, but it was not it does not end our lawsuit, and we've got a lot of good lawsuit in front of us and a lot of fight left in us. That was kind of the overview. I know that was a lot of information in just a few minutes there. Um, these things really work best from my perspective if people ask questions. So, Johnny, if you're okay with it, I'd like to give the audience a minute to ask a question.
Yeah, go for it. Don't be shy, guys. I know somebody's got a question for Dusty.
It can't be this easy this evening.
Yeah.
Looks like Doug Freitas has a question.
I see Doug's hand. Go.
I was looking at the Sigma codes, and it says that the high priority basins are going to be required to pay the fees from 2017 on. Is that part of the reason they send us the memo saying that we need to go back and record our extraction and pay the fee? Is there a reason that they base their the reporting for 24 and 25 and the fees on? Did they give a reason?
Well, they did give a reason, and that reason is questionable in the eyes of the law, and we are going to question that. The short answer to that is the State Water Board is of the opinion that they were due those fees in 24 and 25, and despite having the court issue an injunction telling them legally they could not collect those fees, they're retroactively trying to collect. We don't know that that's a legal request, a demand of the State Water Board, and we are working to figure that out and are challenging that. But the way the court system works, that's going to take some time. We're not actually in a position where we can officially challenge that demand of the State Water Board until the end of December.
Thank you.
Well, Johnny, I can hang out with you guys for a few more minutes before I've got to move on to my next commitment this evening. So if anybody has any questions as this goes on, I'm happy to answer them while I'm around.
Yeah, you're welcome to hang out and hang and listen to the rest of the presentation. Or if you need to go, you can go. It's no problem. And we really appreciate it. Thank you for giving us an update.
Appreciate the opportunity. It's always good to tell our story.
All right. All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and move the slide on, and we are now to the draft allocation policy overview. And this is where I hand it over to Amir.
All right. Well, good evening, everyone. And thank you again for attending. I think most of you probably know me, but I'm Amir Hussein. I'm with Geosyntec Consultants. We are the engineering consultants that are helping South Fork put together their groundwater sustainability plan. And just to carry on just a little bit more from what Dusty was talking about, as Dusty mentioned and Doug in his question, the reporting requirements for the pumping that has occurred is from the State Water Board is basically they've asked from July of 24 to September of 25, and that information is due to them on May 1st. And so right now, the plan is for the South Fork Kings to submit their revised groundwater sustainability plan by the end of March of 26. So a couple months before that May deadline. And as part of that submittal, we will be also submitting a request for a waiver of those fees. So that's one. And then the second thing we'll be asking for is what is colloquially called as a good actor provision, basically saying that we are in compliance with Sigma, and if nothing else, the South Fork Kings GSA should be excluded from the probationary process. So all of that is going to be submitted, and in order to meet those deadlines, we have to have this allocation policy in place. So the idea here, of course, is to have this public comment period that ends on December 1. And we will then be taking all of your comments back to our Grower Advisory Committee in the first week of December. That Grower Advisory Committee will consider all questions, comments, anything that's received in this comment period. They will then make some recommendations to changes to the policy, and then we'll be taking all of this back to the South Fork Kings board on December 18th at 5:30 here in Lemoore at the City Council chambers. The South Fork board meets to consider and approve the final version of that. So just want to make sure everybody is aware of some of those timelines and why we're pushing as quickly as we are. There's a few other policies that you will see. And by the way, there will be a separate comment period for the groundwater sustainability plan in its entirety as well. So when we have that available and completed and a draft ready for public comment, we'll be taking it out for public comment as well. So you'll have an opportunity to read the document and comment on it. All right. So why do we need an allocation policy? As Johnny mentioned, there's essentially two parts to what we can do as a GSA. We know we can increase supply, pardon me, and focus in on finding new sources of water, trying to better utilize the sources that we have, maximize those, and come up with better ways to utilize existing water. The other part of the equation, though, and the other knob we have is the demand side. And as we've talked about, it's about demand reduction. So there are projects listed in the draft groundwater sustainability plan that will talk about how we're going to handle the supply side. But the allocation policy is really focused in on demand reduction and starting to reduce the amount of groundwater pumping per acre of land that we have in South Fork. Next slide, Johnny. So the groundwater allocation itself is essentially split into four parts. The first one is for anyone who does not have a groundwater meter and a meter on their well. We are going to be using an evapotranspiration, that's what ET stands for, methodology using satellite data and then there's a company called Land IQ that provides this data to us on a field basis and on a monthly basis. For those of you that may choose to use that methodology, there will be a precipitation credit that will be applied, because essentially what the ET is reading is the water use off the trees, the ET value off the trees. We then subtract out your precipitation credits. We also subtract out from that number any surface water deliveries. The surface water deliveries on a per field basis is something that each grower is going to have to provide the GSA. We don't have a mechanism to know how much each field receives. So on a field basis, you've got to be able to provide us that. We then back calculate what your groundwater pumping is. So there are some assumptions built into that methodology. On the other hand, you can skip all of that, make it very simple, and just report your groundwater pumping directly through the meter. With the idea, of course, and our existing policy is to move everyone towards meters over time. The sustainable yield itself, and we're going to talk a little bit about what how we calculated that. But the sustainable yield is essentially all of the water input into the system. And we take a look at all of that. That includes recharge from the river. It includes losses from the canal systems. It includes underflow. And we looked at all of that and said, okay, this is the sustainable yield. There's a difference between the sustainable yield and the native yield. So the native yield, for example, does not include losses from the canal systems and other things, but the sustainable yield does. And that value is going to be tradable within the South Fork Kings GSA. So if you're not using it, it rolls over for a 5-year period. And for some reason, if you feel like, hey, I'm just not using my sustainable yield, or you choose not to use it, you can trade that to others, landowners within South Fork that are part of the program. You don't have to tell us what that trade deal was. That's strictly between you and the other party. You just have to tell us how many acre feet of water you traded. So if I trade 10 acre feet to Alex and I tell Johnny, and on your account within the system, he subtracts 10 acre feet from me in my sustainable yield bucket and puts it into Alex's. Any landowner developed credits. These landowner developed credits is a fancy way of saying recharge credits, or any other surface water that you might bring into the area. So we'll give you credit for that. You have to tell us, and there's some rules, and we have a whole recharge policy on that. But again, those credits can be traded. And then we also realize that, we can't get everyone down to just a sustainable yield right away. So there is going to be a 15-year transitional period where we are going to allow you to overpump and give you a transitional allocation. So there will be some additional water allocated for everyone, and we'll go through all of these values here in a few slides. But that transitional allocation cannot be traded, and it does not roll over year to year. It's one of those things that you use it in the year, and then it's gone, because it's literally overdraft pumping, so we're not allowing people to trade that water. And then finally, if you use all of those 4 water sources of water, then you're pumping additional water in what we're calling overdraft pumping, and that will have some penalties to it, and it's going to be both financial penalties and then reductions in future years of your allocation. So we'll go through all of these in more detail in the next few slides. Johnny, next slide. Okay. How did we calculate the sustainable yield, which is essentially the amount, the entire subbasin? So this is all the 5 GSAs that Johnny showed in the map earlier. And basically what we did is we went back to our groundwater model that was prepared in 2020, and it gave a range of values for that sustainable yield. As you can imagine, everything changes on a year-to-year basis. So we looked at everything over a long period, and they came up with a range. We opted to use 350,000 acre feet as a sustainable yield. That's towards the lower end of the range. It's not the bottom of the range, but it is towards the lower end. It's a little bit more conservative. And we chose that as we felt that was something that we could maintain. I'm sorry, excuse me 1 minute. And so that was how we came up with that value. Johnny, next slide. Okay, so the South Fork, there was different ways. We had a total sustainable yield for the entire subbasin, and then there was different ways that we could have split that up between the individual GSAs of the 5 GSAs. And South Fork took a look at that, and we opted to say, look, we should do it based on acreage. And the reason for that was simple. Under California law, it's essentially beneficial use of the water directly beneath each piece of land. And we felt like this would be the most representative way of ensuring that everyone who owns land within the GSA and the subbasin would be entitled to an equal share of that sustainable yield. So essentially, South Fork Kings makes up 14% of the entire subbasin in terms of acreage, and therefore was assigned 14% of the sustainable yield, which is 14% of 350,000 acre feet, which essentially equates to 48,000 acre feet. We divided that by the acres across South Fork, and that works out to roughly about 0.68 acre feet per acre. So that's the sustainable yield that we would use for South Fork. And I know many of you are aware that the Mid-Kings River GSA opted to do this differently, and they used a slightly different, well, not a slightly, they used a different method. They used a method based on historical pumping. We are in the process of having an ongoing conversation with Mid-Kings. We think that, our concern that we've put in writing is that methodology tends to reward people for over pumping historically. That has led to some of the problems that we're dealing with now, and that our methodology is probably a more fair methodology for everyone. Excuse me. Pardon me 1 second. I'm going to pause just for a second. Sorry, I'm fighting a cold and I'm losing this battle, I think. So anyways, as I was saying, we have some concerns about Mid-King's approach. We are probably going to continue our conversations with the other GSAs. Johnny and I on Friday are meeting with the other GSA managers to specifically talk about coming up with one methodology. We obviously are concerned that we go into the state with different methods, and we want to try and address that as quickly as we can. As we continue these conversations, we are also offering up some alternatives that we think might be equitable for everyone. One of the things that we feel that there's areas of the subbasin, especially in the lake bottom, where not much pumping is occurring, and we think that water that would be divided down there, would be made available to them, probably should be equally divided amongst the northern 3 GSA. So we are, as I said, those are some ongoing conversations, and we hope to have some answers for you fairly quickly. And we understand we're under quite a time crunch, and these are things that we were hoping to have resolved by now, but we are still moving forward. Next slide. Okay. The sustainable yield, as far as the South Fork allocation is concerned, we are essentially going to assign a sustainable yield to parcels that are 5 acres or larger, and landowners may combine multiple parcels within South Fork to equals that 5 acres. Parcels that are less than 5 acres will receive just a de minimis value of saying, hey, you're going to get 2 acre feet per acre annually as a total. You must register your parcels with the GSA. We have a existing policy to register your wells. When you go in there, you claim your parcels and you register your well. So if you've not done that, please contact Johnny. He'd be happy to walk you through that and help you with that process. We also assigned a sustainable yield to only, there's essentially to what we call the B and C zone. There's essentially 3 major aquifers that we considered. There's a few more clay zones in there, but we divided it into 3. We basically said there was an A zone, which is the upper roughly 70 to 100 feet that was continuous across the entire GSA, South Fork GSA. And then there's the B zone, which takes us down to the top of the Corcoran clay. And then what we consider the C zone is the Corcoran is below the Corcoran clay. We assigned a sustainable yield value to the B and C zones. We did not assign one to the A zone at this point. We didn't feel like we had enough data to really be able to say exactly how much of that sustainable yield is in the A. And we will do that once additional information becomes available to us. And the other thing we did was we were going to exclude any lands that are owned by any governmental entities and specifically exclude those from the sustainable yield as they don't need it, and make more of the sustainable yield available to the growers. All right, next slide. Okay. As I mentioned, the sustainable yield is assigned depending on the aquifer. We do assign that sustainable yield amount annually. So you will see in a few slides that we will present everything in 5-year blocks. You don't get all 5 years at one time. Each of those years within that 5-year block, you will be assigned your sustainable yield and it'll be credited to your account. Any unused sustainable yield can be carried over to a 5-year rolling retirement, meaning you get it to keep it for 5 years. On the 6th year, the first year will roll off. So don't let that happen. We want to put this water to the best use. If you are holding on to your sustainable yield and not using it, then we are not doing something correctly, and we want to put that water to use. So you can trade it, right? There's a value to it. So let's put that water to use. And that's one of the reasons that we allowed people to hold it for the 5-year rolling retirement. One of the other things we realized is that we do have landowners that have contiguous parcels, and they were operating farm units. It's just one big farm unit moving, pipelines moving water back and forth. And some of those cross over the South Fork boundary with the neighboring GSA or even neighboring subbasin. And we are going to allow people to continue to use that and work with the South Fork and whatever the neighboring GSA might be. But you have to meet a series of conditions. The draft document has like about 9 different conditions that have to be met. If you are in that category, we very highly recommend that you get with Johnny as quickly as you can so that we can find out what's going on, work with you, make sure that you're eligible, and make sure that you meet all the requirements, and then help you work with the neighboring GSA to meet all of their requirements as well. And then finally, we realize that if we start to see what we call undesirable results, so falling water levels, increased subsidence, water quality issues, we may have to limit groundwater pumping faster in some areas than others. So there is provision in the document for us to be able to say, look, if we start to see impacts based on groundwater pumping, we may have to further limit these allocations, and certain portions and areas within the subbasin may have a reduced allocation because of those impacts. All right, next slide. All right, the landowner developed credits. So we kind of talked about this a little bit. This is the recharge of, if you bring in floodwaters, you bring in surface water, and you can do recharge. You can build dedicated basins, and or you can do on-farm recharge. You can do recharge on fallow grounds. You can bring in additional surface water. So if there's imported water brought into or surface water that's recharged within the GSA, we want to make sure that you get credit for it. Again, we have some very specific requirements in our recharge policy that you want to make sure you meet. And I would, again, highly recommend that everyone, work closely with the GSA on those. Next slide. Okay, so you have very specific requirements within the landowner developed credits. If you develop a engineered basin and you come back to us and you say, look, I have an engineer's report. This is what they say. We'll review that and you'll get 90% of the credit of the water you apply to that land. If you come back to us and you don't have an engineer's report and you're just putting water on a fallow piece of land, then that drops down to 75%. So the amount of credit that you get for the water, there's some very important things to keep in mind, and they do change. So again, work with us and we'll make sure that you're getting the appropriate amount of credits. Those credits are also carried over for 5 years, and then the first year retires on year 6. And again, they can be traded. And I know I'm being a little bit repetitive, but I'm doing that on purpose because I want to make sure that we hit some very key points for all of you, which is if you have these credits and you don't use them, then they do, they can be traded to others. And whatever that deal you cut with them, just let us know how much you want to trade, and we can work that out on your accounts. Okay, next slide. All right, transitional water. So transitional water is the amount of overdraft that we're allowing. That transitional water essentially will start at a value, and then over the next 15 years, we're going to reduce it down to 0. So by the end of 2040, you are pumping only sustainable yield. In order to qualify for transitional water, that land had to be in agricultural production sometime between 2015 and 2024. It doesn't have to be in production for the entire time period. What we're looking for is that it was in production sometime between that time period. The 2015 obviously is when Sigma started. And if the land has been fallow prior to 2015, then it does not qualify for the transitional allocation. Again, any landowner can appeal any of these decisions directly to the South Fork Board. Transitional water will also be allocated annually. So again, it's in 5-year blocks, but allocated on each year annually. Only to those who remain in full compliance with all the GSA requirements. So that means any requirements for reporting, requirements for registering wells, requirements in terms of fees, and making sure that all of those fees are paid. So in order to receive your transitional allocation each year, you've got to make sure that you fully comply with all of the GSA requirements. Next slide, Johnny. Overdraft. Okay, so now I've used up my sustainable yield. I've used up my credits. I've used up my transitional water. And at this point, you're pumping more than that. So that's recorded as an overdraft on your account. We realize that this is way more than what we should be pumping. We're actually looking at trying to get reductions in order for us to meet our requirements. We've got to have some huge disincentives for people to minimize this overdraft. Plus, it's not fair to everyone else who is playing by the rules and pumping within those allocations. Next slide. Oh, I'm sorry, Johnny, can you go back? I'm sorry, I apologize. So on the overdraft pumping, the key thing to keep in mind is that there is a penalty of $500 an acre foot. That's dictated by Sigma. It's actually within the statute itself. And then in addition to that, we will start to reduce your next year's allocation by the amount that you exceed it. So if you go over and you have overdraft pumping by half an acre foot, your next year's allocation will be reduced by half an acre foot. And I know that seems harsh and and punitive, but the GSA needs to show that we have some rules in place to minimize that overdraft. We want to get everyone down to pumping within the groundwater allocation. in order to meet our reductions in demand and actual reductions in groundwater pumping. Now, if things change and the allocation itself may change over time, if we end up with a number of wet years, I mean, if you had told me we were going to have 3 wet years in a row, and after this last rain, maybe 4, who knows? But if that changes, then we may change some of the allocations and things might be different. But the ultimate goal is to get everybody back within that allocation. Next slide. So the allocations themselves. This is broken down by each of the zones, and it's broken down by water year. Water year again is October 1 through September 30th. So October 1 of 2025 through September 30th of 26 is the first water year. The shallow water, this is the above 100 feet or so. Those wells can pump up to 3 acre-feet. The B zone can pump the sustainable yield of the 0. Now, I wrote 0.66. Again, this is a draft. We went through while we were preparing this document, and we actually tweaked that number. So it's actually going to be 0.68. So everywhere you see the 0.66, please just make it 0.68. We add the 2 acre-feet of transitional water. And then if you're below the clay, the Corcoran clay, you only get a transitional allocation that first 5 years of 1.34. The reason that the transitional allocation is below the clay is less is specifically due to the fact that we have a subsidence concerns. In order to minimize those subsidence concerns, which we believe is occurring primarily due to pumping below the clay, not entirely, but primarily because of that pumping, we've reduced the allocation below the clay to 1.34. And then you'll notice in water years 31 through 35, those transitional values decrease. And then they decrease again in water years 36 through 40, and they disappear by the time we get to the end of 2040. There is a little asterisk next to the A zone values that don't change for the next 15 years. And that is because right now that is an estimated that we think the A zone can continue to pump at 3 acre-feet. If we find out that value needs to be modified, we did put those asterisks there specifically for a reason. That's the best information that we have at this time. What is likely going to change A zone pumping is going to be, are we seeing any impacts to domestic wells that may be located within the A zone? And if that turns out to be the case, then we may look at specific areas that may need to be limited and modified. But if it turns out that that's not the case, then we certainly anticipate continuing to pump at that value. Next slide. Okay, so some important information. Quick question, Ed. Yes, I'm sorry, go ahead and unmute yourself and please ask. How deep is each zone? So the A zone is, like I said, roughly 70 to 100 feet deep. The B zone starts at about 100 feet and continues down to roughly around 700. I'm generalizing these values. The Corcoran clay, the top of the Corcoran clay can be anywhere from 600 to 700 plus, and then below the Corcoran clay, which is 700 feet and more, is going to be the C zone. So each of these zones is fairly thick. The B and the C certainly are. The A is a bit more limited, but what we do see is that the A is continuous across the South Fork. It is not necessarily that case across the rest of the subbasin. Okay. The allocation. So this is important. The combined total cap of 3.0. So acre feet per acre. So that means that you can pump up to 3 acre feet in any of the 3 aquifers combined. If you pump 3 acre feet out of the A zone, then that's the total amount we're going to allow you to pump. If you pump 1.5 feet out of the A and 1.5 feet out of the B, that's acceptable as well. You have to have the appropriate amount of allocation in each of the aquifers to pump that amount. But we are trying to be as flexible as we can. And I think what you'll see throughout this document is as much flexibility as we can realistically give you. If you have the landowner developed credits and they exceed the 3.0, they don't expire that year, they'll roll over and you can use them for the next remainder of 4 years. Oh, I'm sorry. If you do have landowner developed credits, sorry, I misspoke. If you do have the landowner developed credits, you can pump up to 4 acre feet per acre. So you can go from the 3 to the 4. That 1 extra acre feet is made up of your landowner developed credits. And then again, if you have more than that, you can always roll the landowner developed credits over for another 4 years. And you can buy other and transfer sustainable yields from other landowners or buy their credits as well. So there are some options that you have. You just need to let us know what's going on so we can make sure everyone's account is properly credited and debted out of the other person's account. All right, next slide. Pumping fees and penalties. Okay. We are working on budgets right now. We are working closely with the Grower Advisory Committee in trying to determine exactly how much funding the GSA will need and the funding mechanism. We do anticipate that there will be some pumping fees set for both the sustainable yield, transitional water, and we're still in the process of debating whether those pumping fees will apply to any recharge credits as well. The idea is to set those by the board, and there will be some mechanism by which we will be taking these out for public comment and or possibly even elections, depending on the methodology used by the GSA to come up with these fees. So there's going to be a lot more information. As I mentioned, there's several more outreach campaigns that will be happening over the next few months. I already mentioned the fact that if you exceed your allocations, then you will be subject to a civil penalty of $500 an acre foot. That's the amount set in Sigma by statute. And we will be reducing the following year's allocation will be reduced by the amount of the excess pumping. So those are pretty severe penalties for exceeding your allocation. So if you're on a point where you're starting to exceed that allocation, the idea is to come talk to the GSA. Let's figure out what we can do. Let's work together. Let's see if there's credits available on the market for you, and try to work with each landowner to come up with something that works best for you. Next slide, please. Okay. As I mentioned it several times, we've talked about different buckets of water. The way that we're currently, this is the default bucket, how we're going to subtract water use from your account. So anyone who is using the ET method, we will go in there and subtract out the effective precipitation. This is the amount of precipitation that actually makes it down to the root zone. There's a USDA calculation for that, and we will be using that methodology, and it's spelled out in more detail in the allocation policy itself. Secondly, we will be subtracting out any sustainable yield carryover. So if you have sustainable yield from previous years that you have not used, we'll subtract that out first. And then we'll take your sustainable yield for the actual year that you're in, and then down to any landowner developed credits, and then to your transitional water, and then finally to the more expensive overdraft. Now, for some reason, if you need to change this order, you have a whole bunch of landowner developed credit that might roll off in a year or so. Then come talk to the GSA and we will allow you to change it once a year. So you come to us at the beginning of the year, you tell us, hey, I really need, I want to change my water use for that year, and we will allow you to do it once, because once we do that, it becomes an accounting nightmare to go back and forth. So we will be allowing everyone to use it once. You just come tell us, and we'll make that happen. And that'll remain, the new method will remain your default until you tell us to change it again. All right, next slide. This is just towards the end here. I just want to remind everyone that we do have a well registration policy that's in place right now. We are in the process of trying to get all of the wells registered. It's very, very important that we do this. We want to show the state that we understand our GSA enough to be able to manage it properly. And what it does is it helps us to understand how many wells are located where, how deep they are, where that pumping is occurring. It also helps us to understand if we start to see impacts in some areas, water levels continue to drop, how many domestic wells or shallow wells might be at risk. And that allows us to then start to take management actions and figure out what we can do to prevent those from going dry. The well mitigation program that we're talking about earlier means that the GSA is going to be collecting funds to help mitigate some of these wells. So if we can identify at-risk wells early enough, maybe we can take some action so we don't have to spend money mitigating those wells. So if you haven't registered your wells yet, please get with Johnny. He's going to be happy to work with you and walk you through that process. We've got a nice little software package that we put together, and it's pretty easy to use. And it'll help you. It'll really help the GSA understand exactly where all of our pumping is occurring. Johnny, I believe that's my last slide.
Yeah. Let me unmute myself so you can hear me again. So yeah, thank you, Amir. Appreciate that. I'm going to just go ahead and click forward to the next steps and questions here.
I think there's a question in the chat.
I think there is. What do we got here? Do you know how much of the South Fork well registration has been registered? So we are at, I believe, 39,000 acres that are registered now, based on the parcel acreage. Not certain that all of the wells on those parcels have been registered. Well, I know for a fact that they haven't, but I don't know what percentage that would be. Let's see. Any other questions? Oh, Doug, go ahead. Unmute yourself.
Okay, here we go. So sorry about the phone. I got a question on Amir. Have all of our GSAs agreed to use the coordination agreement style of a GSP?
So Doug, yes, the GSAs have agreed to have a coordination agreement. That agreement has not yet been signed by any of the GSAs. We are hoping to have a coordinated methodology for the groundwater allocation built into that allocation, the coordination agreement. So we actually would write, this is the methodology we're going to do across the entire sub-basin, and we're still working on that. And we're meeting Friday with the other GSA managers to try and work out how that methodology is going to be agreed upon and conducted so that it can make it into the coordination agreement.
Can we in South Fort Kings have a different GSP totally from another GSA with this coordination agreement? And what are the chances of doing that?
So the plan right now, as far as the groundwater sustainability plan is concerned, is the chapters, for example, like Johnny mentioned, the basin setting and things of that nature that are common. Those would be common amongst all of the GSAs, and then each GSA will have sections in there that of their GSA that will be GSP, excuse me, that will be different. And so we are allowing each GSA to have their own GSP and point out where there may be differences between them and the surrounding, how they're handling things might be a little bit different. But specifically on the allocation methodology, we are hoping to get one methodology for the entire subbasin. That's what we're working towards.
So that was kind of where I was going. The coordination agreement may not happen within the basin unless we have that part in there.
Yeah, that's what we're working towards, Doug, and that is definitely a concern. It took Kuya 2 years to come up with a methodology, but we are going to move forward. And for some reason, if that's not the case, then we'll be having a lot more discussions with the grower committee and the board on where and what the hiccups might be and what we should do next.
The sustainable yield, are we only entitled to the 0.66, or can I know the answer, but I want to ask it to make sure. If I'm going to be pumping out of the B zone, there's no sustainable yield. So the A zone, if I'm going to be not used by B and C zone credits, can I sell the 0.66 from each of the B and C zone and build credit? No, it's just one.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're not letting you double dip.
Yeah.
It's just the ones.
So Doug, just to be clear, if you pump the 3 acre feet out of the A zone, there's no sustainable yield for you to trade in the B or C. The total pumping is 3 acre feet.
But you still accumulate the 0.6.
No, you don't. If you don't pump B or C, but you pump 3 acre feet out of the A, there's no accumulation in the B and C.
So you're left with on-farm recharge to build a credit, basically, right?
Yeah, or bring in some, some other surface water source. Yeah.
Well, I've sat in all these meetings for months, and it's I'm learning more every time I ask a question. But I would hope that the coordination agreement would allow us to trade credits across the boundaries. Not so much the actual water, but the credits.
Not yet on a sub-basin, but that is not outside of the realm of some future possibility for sure.
Yeah, Doug, I'm going to take that one a little bit too. I think we have a long ways to go before we get to trading, having trading rules that are set in place between the GSAs. And right now, each GSA is basically just trying to get past the finish line.
The reason I mentioned
agreement is really, really a basic document. It's basically an agreement on how we settle our differences.
Yeah.
So we have a very basic coordination agreement, which meets all the standards that are set in the law. There are some subbasins that have much more complicated ones, like Kauai's got their entire water accounting framework spelled out in their coordination agreement.
Yeah.
I don't see us getting there anytime soon. But to answer your very first question a little bit further, even without that coordination agreement, if we submit our GSP and we are implementing everything that we say we're going to implement, we will have very good grounds to apply for the directive costs. And that's what our goal is to focus on South Fork Kings GSA and basically put blinders on for everybody else. And we want to get past the finish line so that the landowners in our GSA aren't charged the penalty fees from the state.
I got one more question. So if you're not registered, if your wells aren't registered, okay, let's put it this way. Once you register, are you going to go back retroactively to accumulate the sustainable yield or credits like in 23 when the governor signed that statute or whatever it was to allow us to apply that flood release water and gain credit? I get, the 23 year when we reported that to the GSA, we're still going to get to use that credit, I assume, but will you get to use it if you're not registered?
No, you have to be in compliance with all the policies of the GSA,
Okay.
which includes well registration.
Thank you.
No problem. All right. Does anybody else have any questions? Manamir, I think we're going to get off easy tonight.
I always make the joke that, we when we present these in person, we don't get a lot of questions, but then everyone stands outside in the parking lot and talks for another hour after the meeting. So I'm looking at you, Doug, and but yeah, please, we are absolutely looking for your comments, your concerns, your questions, anything. And Johnny, if you go one more slide. You'll see on there on the screen there's a QR code. Our comment period is open until December 1st. You can submit comments on the website. You can email your comments to Johnny. You can pick up the phone and call him. And one thing about Johnny, he's absolutely fantastic about returning calls. If you don't reach him right away, he will absolutely get back to you so we are looking for your questions and comments. And as I mentioned earlier, we will take all of these back to the Grower Advisory Committee, give them a chance to review everything that's been submitted, and then make modifications, changes, whatever they recommend on this policy, and then take it back to the board for the December 18th hearing at the board. And so if you haven't yet, please submit some comments. And then secondly, on the website, you can make sure that you're signed up to receive all of our email blasts. Johnny does a fantastic job of getting emails out with updates on what's going on. In addition to that, there's South Fork has a Facebook page and a Instagram page as well. And so if you have either one of those two social medias, please sign up and follow along. It's a great way to get information. You'll be also the next thing I was going to mention is you'll be receiving a postcard in the mail. Every landowner in over a certain size is going to get a postcard, and that'll also have some information on there about how to make comments and all of these things. So we are very serious about receiving and taking your comments and considering them very seriously. And we know that this is a very impactful policy. And we want to make sure that we're trying to do this in a way that meets the requirements of SGMA, but also allows, us to keep as much land in production and make it a softer landing for some of our growers as well. Johnny, do you want to add anything to that, or?
No, I want to thank everybody for taking some time out of their evening and paying attention.
I don't think Doug has a question.
Oh, I thought I was hoping it was just waving goodbye, but okay, go ahead, Doug.
No, I have a question. Actually, it's not Doug. So, how would it work if you were able to purchase, say, flood release water, and you put it on your neighbor's property? You didn't have a place to put it. How would that work?
Well, as long as, you would obviously have to work out an agreement with your neighbor,
Right.
to be able to sink water on his property. So
Right.
that would be between you and the neighbor.
So
But
who,
so if your neighbor had a registered basin that was engineered and he was
Uh-huh.
getting a 90% credit, then whatever deal you would make, if you
okay.
that's what would be available. If he was just doing on-farm recharge or an unregistered basin, then there'd be a 75% credit.
One of the concerns I have about that A zone, I'm just thinking about it. The guys that don't have a B or C zone well aren't going to be able to build a sustainable yield. Is that correct? Am I wrong in saying that? If they pump their 3 feet?
Yeah, if they pump their 3 feet, they wouldn't. But if they
pump less,
if they leave their sustainable yield that 0.66, if they pump 3 minus 0.66,
oh, okay,
then that 0.66 would roll over.
Okay.
nice.
But the one thing that we know for sure is that these numbers will change at some point because we have a lot of data gaps. We don't know exactly, how many wells we have. We don't know exactly where they're screened, where they're pumping from. We need to understand the aquifer and what's happening there a lot better before we can actually get numbers that will be more reliable going forward into the future.
Thank you.
All right, Amir, anything else?
No, I'm good.
Julie, are we forgetting anything?
You might have to unmute yourself, Julie.
Yes, I said you guys did a great job. Good questions and good conversation.
All right. Well, thanks everybody. I'm going to go ahead and let you guys have the rest of your evening back, and we appreciate your participation.
Thank you, everyone.